What if the most famous lost expedition in the Arctic didn't just die from cold and hunger, but from a slow, invisible sabotage happening inside their own bodies? What if the moment they sailed, the ending was already baked into the tin of their dinner, the pipes of their ships, and the decisions of men who had no idea what they were really up against? You're in 1845. You can almost hear the cheers on the docks. Sir John Franklin, a respected Royal Navy officer, is about to do what maps still fail to do: cut a clean line through the top of the world and finally chart the Northwest Passage. Two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, reinforced hulls, steam engines ripped from locomotives for emergency power, enough provisions for years, even a small library. This isn't reckless exploration. It's industrial confidence pointed north. And then silence. The last Europeans to see them are whalers in Baffin Bay. After that, Franklin's expedition vanishes into the white. No triumphant return, no letters, no wreckage drifting home, just 129 men erased from the world's loudest empire. At first, the facts feel like they should point to a simple answer. The Arctic is brutal, ships get trapped, people starve, end of story. But the clues that slowly surface don't behave like a clean disaster. They behave like a mystery that keeps changing shape. Because the expedition wasn't unprepared. They carried thousands of tins of preserved food, a new technology that promised safety from rot and scurvy. They had coal. They had warm clothing by the standards of the day. They had naval discipline. And they had time. If you imagine them trapped in ice, you imagine them waiting, rationing, writing careful plans by lamplight. You imagine order. Yet the evidence we do find suggests something more like unraveling. Years later, searchers begin to collect fragments. A note, a grave, a rumor carried by Inuit hunters across enormous distances. The first deaths on the expedition happen early. 3 sailors are buried on Beechey Island in the winter of 1845-46, far sooner than you'd expect from a crew that left England healthy and stocked. Then comes the document that haunts everything. In 1859, a search party finds a message in a cairn on King William Island. It says the ships were trapped in ice since September 1846. It says Franklin died in June 1847. And then, in a cramped, later edition, it says the remaining officers and men abandoned the ships in April 1848, over 100 people, planning to march south toward the Back River. You read that and the first question hits you: why abandon the ships? In that era, a ship was shelter. Wood, iron, stoves, bunks, tools. Even trapped, it's a fortress against the wind. Leaving it means choosing exposure. So what could push disciplined sailors to do the unthinkable? What could make a floating warehouse feel more dangerous than the ice? More details leak in, and the picture gets darker. Inuit testimony, recorded by searchers like John Ray and later Charles Francis Hall, describes starving white men dragging a boat over the ice. Some accounts speak of bodies along the route. And the most disturbing claim, signs of cannibalism, cut marks, broken bones, the kind of desperation that doesn't happen in the first act of a survival story. It happens after something has already gone terribly wrong. Now the hypothesis starts to form in your mind. Not just cold, not just ice, something that weakens judgment, something that turns a well-equipped mission into a slow collapse. And there's an obvious suspect, hiding in plain sight: the food. Franklin's expedition relied heavily on tinned provisions, produced on a massive scale. Canning existed, but quality control didn't look like it does today. The contractor, Stephen Goldner, delivered tens of thousands of tins in a rush. Later reports criticized the workmanship. Some tins were poorly sealed. Some were reportedly soldered sloppily. And that solder matters because it contained lead. Lead is not dramatic like a blizzard. It's patient. It builds up. It creeps into nerves and organs. It can cause stomach pain, weakness, confusion, irritability, and cognitive decline. It can mimic the very symptoms you'd chalk up to Arctic hardship, while quietly making every decision worse. You can almost see the feedback loop. Men feel sick, they eat less, they get weaker, they make poorer choices, they lose the ability to coordinate, and the environment punishes every mistake. Then another possibility piles on. The ships had a system for distributing fresh water, and some historians have suggested lead could have leached from pipes or storage. More lead, more exposure, more slow damage. The story seems to click. Tins, solder, pipes, sickness, chaos. The expedition didn't just get trapped, it got poisoned. And the Arctic itself adds a cruel twist. Vitamin C deficiency, scurvy, can return if fresh food is absent. Starvation changes the body's chemistry. Cold stress increases calorie needs. Infections spread more easily in cramped quarters. A crew doesn't have to be unprepared to be overwhelmed. They just have to be trapped long enough for small problems to stack into a cliff. The more you look, the stranger it gets. Because this wasn't an unknown region to the Inuit. People lived and traveled there with skill. They knew how to read ice, how to hunt, how to move with the land. The Franklin crew, for all their technology, were outsiders in a system that rewards flexibility over steel. Now you start seeing the expedition as a clash between two ways of surviving: imperial engineering versus Arctic knowledge. And the tragedy may be that Franklin's men were locked into the first. Even the route matters. The ships were trapped near King William Island. That area can be choked with multi-year ice. If conditions were especially harsh in those years, even the best ship could become a prison. And then there are the bodies. In the 1980s, scientists examined the preserved remains of one of the Beechey Island sailors, John Torrington. The cold had kept him eerily intact. Tests found high levels of lead in tissues. Later analyses of bones from expedition members also showed elevated lead. It sounds like a smoking gun. Your brain wants it to be, because it offers an answer that feels modern and satisfying. A hidden toxin, a technological overreach, an empire undone by its own innovation. And you're not alone in thinking that. Researchers have seriously debated lead poisoning for decades. The idea appears in major discussions of the case, and it's been popularized in books and documentaries. The expedition becomes a cautionary tale about industrial confidence meeting biology. But then you hit the part of the investigation where the ground shifts. Because high lead levels were not rare in Victorian Britain. Lead was everywhere: in plumbing, in paint, in cookware, in food storage, in factories. Sailors might already have carried significant lead in their bodies before they ever saw an iceberg, so finding lead doesn't automatically mean it was the killer. It might just be the background radiation of their era. And some scientists have gone further. A 2017 study led by Keenleyside, examining bones and teeth from Franklin crew remains, argued that lead levels did not show a clear spike during the expedition. Teeth can preserve a timeline of exposure. If the expedition suddenly dosed them with lead from tins, you'd expect a pattern. The evidence didn't cleanly show it. So maybe lead was there, but not the decisive catastrophe. Then what was? This is where the dominant scientific explanation starts to take over, not as a single villain, but as a pileup. Most experts today lean toward a combination of factors: starvation, cold exposure, scurvy or other nutritional deficiencies, disease like tuberculosis or pneumonia, and the crushing logistics of being trapped for multiple winters. And there's another quiet contender: botulism and food spoilage in poorly sealed tins. Not proven, but plausible. If even a fraction of the provisions were unsafe, the crew could have faced repeated bouts of illness. Not enough to kill everyone immediately, but enough to weaken them. Enough to make the ship feel less like shelter and more like a sick bay with no exit. Add the psychology. Imagine a second winter trapped. The dark, the monotony, the sound of ice pressing against hull planks like a slow jaw. You're watching men die. You're realizing rescue is not coming on schedule. Your maps are guesses. Your leadership has lost Franklin himself. Even if you're healthy, your mind starts to bargain. Maybe walking is better than waiting. And there's the most uncomfortable part. The march south was, on paper, not insane. You can follow rivers. You can aim for known trading posts. You can hope to meet Inuit or find game. The decision could have been rational if you underestimate distance, overestimate strength, and misunderstand spring ice. Which brings you to the twist inside the twist. In 2014 and 2016, Parks Canada discovered the wrecks of Erebus and Terror. Real ships, real places, not myths. One of them, Terror, appears to have been left in a relatively orderly state. That detail complicates the total chaos narrative. It suggests planning. maybe even an attempt to return to the ship after abandoning it. So now you're stuck between stories. On one side, the seductive hypothesis, lead poisoning, a hidden internal collapse that explains the confusion, the early deaths, the desperate choices. It's tangible. It feels like detective work pays off. On the other side, the mainstream view, multiple stressors, each survivable alone, combining into an unbeatable trap. It's less cinematic. It's more like reality usually is. But neither side solves everything. If it was just the Arctic, why did 3 men die so early at Beechey Island, during a winter that should have been within their supply margin? If it was just lead, why do other sailors of the era not collapse in the same way, and why doesn't the lead timeline cleanly match the expedition's final years? If it was just bad tins, why did the expedition last long enough to abandon ships after nearly 2 years trapped? Then there's the hardest variable, the decisions we can't replay. We don't know exactly when hope broke. We don't know which men were sick first, which injuries happened, which arguments were had in the dim light below deck. We don't know how much they learned from the Inuit, or how much pride and protocol prevented them from truly adapting. We don't know if the environment in those exact seasons was unusually punishing in ways no journal now records. The Franklin expedition becomes a lesson in how human failure rarely has a single cause. It's a system, a chain, a stack of small collapses that eventually looks from far away like fate. And maybe that's why it still grips you. Because you want the Arctic to be the villain, or lead, or one bad decision. You want a clean answer that keeps the world predictable. Do X, avoid Y, survive. But Franklin's last expedition doesn't offer that comfort. It offers a mirror. You can have the best ships of your age, the newest technology, the confidence of an empire, and still be reduced to footsteps in snow that melts and refreezes, erasing the direction you thought you were going. And somewhere in the silence between those wrecks and that final march is a thought you can't quite shake. Sometimes the world doesn't defeat you with one catastrophe. Sometimes it defeats you by letting you keep going, one reasonable choice at a time, until you realize too late that the map you trusted was never the territory at all.